Hello everyone, and welcome to my Soap Twist 24 channel. I hope everyone is having a wonderful day. Before we begin, please hit the subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. Brooke sat in the living room sipping chamomile tea as the sun dipped low, spreading long shadows across the mansion's marble flooring. She was alone, her mind wandering to the past. For years, she had been the Forrester family's linchpin, her love story with Ridge Forrester a tale of passion and heartache. Ridge has recently been distant, engrossed by the demands of operating Forrester Creations. Their marriage, while robust, bore the scars of numerous battles, betrayals, rivalries, and the lingering shadow of Ridge's first love, Taylor Hayes. Brooke sighed and brushed a strand of blonde hair from her face. She was no stranger to upheaval, yet something about the atmosphere tonight felt off. Thomas's homecoming was announced lightly, almost as an afterthought. Steffi, his sister, said it casually during a stressful family meeting at Forrester Creations. "He's back," she announced, her voice tense. Ridge remained unconcerned with his son's abrupt return, preferring to focus on his new collection. Brooke, on the other hand, had a tingling sensation of discomfort. Thomas had always been a difficult person, a talented designer with a tender and obsessive heart. His previous preoccupation on her had caused rifts, sorrow, and near disasters. But it was years ago, she reminded herself. He had left to find himself and mend. Surely he had changed. The doorbell rang, jolting Brooke from her reverie. She laid down her tea and strolled into the foyer, her heels clicking on the gleaming floor. Looking through the peephole, she noticed Thomas standing on the doorstep, his figure clear against the fading light. Her stomach wrenched, but she faked a grin as she opened the door. "Thomas," she murmured warmly, her voice wavering. "It's been so long." He walked in, his presence filling the room. He was taller than she remembered, with sharper features and dark hair slicked back. But it was his eyes that stopped her. Cold, calculating, and devoid of the tenderness she had known. "Brooke," he murmured, his voice silky, yet tinged with something she didn't recognize. "You haven't changed," she said anxiously, nodding toward the living room. "Come in, please. Can I get you anything?
Tea? Wine?"
He shook his head, but his gaze never left her. Her smile wavered as she said, "I'm not here for pleasantries. Is everything all right? Steffi mentioned you were back, but she didn't." "Steffi doesn't recognize me anymore," he interrupted, his tone stern. "None of you do." Brooke's heart raced. She took a step back, her instincts screaming at her to create some space between them. "Thomas, what's happening? You're terrifying me." He smirked, a vicious twist of his lips that sent shivers down her spine.
"Good."
"You should be afraid." The words hung in the air, thick and foreboding. Brooke's thoughts raced, looking for an answer. This was not the Thomas she remembered, the boy who had previously looked at her with misdirected admiration. This was someone else, someone who had been broken and transformed into something horrible. She took another step back, her hand resting on the edge of a console table. "Why are you here?" she inquired, her voice barely above a whisper. Thomas went closer, taking measured steps. "I came to settle a score with Brooke. You, Ridge, the entire family, you've taken everything from me. My position within the organization, my dignity, and my future. You turned me into an outcast." "That is not true," she responded, her voice wavering. "We didn't want you to leave. You chose to leave." "Lies," he yelled, his eyes flaming. "You shoved me outside. You all did. And now I'm going to hold you accountable." Brooke's breath seized in her throat. She looked down the corridor, estimating the distance to the door. But Thomas moved faster. In an instant, he was in front of her, blocking her way. "Don't even think about it," he continued, his tone low and dangerous. "Thomas, please," she asked, her voice breaking. "Whatever you think we did, we can discuss it. We can repair this." He laughed, a hollow sound reverberating around the room. "Fix it? What you've done is irreversible. You are the first, Brooke. The first to experience what it's like to lose everything." He lunged before she could react. Brooke shouted, but it was cut short when his palm clamped over her lips. She tried, her nails piercing into his arm, but he was far too strong. The room whirled, her eyesight dimming as she struggled to remain aware. As darkness fell, her final thought was of Ridge. Would he ever know what had happened to her? The next morning, the Forrester mansion was unusually silent. Ridge returned home from an overnight business conference, expecting to find Brooke waiting with her customary warmth. Instead, he discovered pandemonium. The furniture had been flipped over, a lamp had cracked on the floor, and Brooke's phone was abandoned on the couch. His heart fell as he yelled out her name, his voice echoing throughout the empty house. There were no responses. He dialed Steffi while his hands shook. "Something's wrong," he replied when she responded. "Brooke is gone. The house, it's a mess." Steffi arrived within an hour, her face pallid. "What happened, Dad? Where is Brooke?" "I don't know," Ridge said, his voice scratchy. "I found it this way." Steffi scanned the area, noticing that her car, pocketbook, and other belongings were still present. "This wasn't at random," she explained. "Someone did this." Ridge's mind raced, but one name kept coming up. "Thomas," he muttered. "He was back in town. You mentioned he was unusual." Steffi shook her head, tears welling up in her eyes. "I did not want to believe it. He's been so angry and distant." But he wouldn't, would he? The question remained unanswered until the cops arrived, cordoning off the mansion and searching through the evidence. Thomas's fingerprints were detected on a glass in the living room. A neighbor reported seeing a man matching his description leave the residence the night before. The pieces were falling into place, but they painted an image that was too horrible to accept. Days passed into weeks, and Brooke's abduction sparked a media frenzy. The Forrester family tale, nicknamed The Bold and the Beautiful by the tabloids, had become tragic. Ridge was a shell of himself, consumed with guilt. Had he been too focused on his work? Had he overlooked the symptoms of Thomas's unraveling? Steffi, meanwhile, was dealing with her own guilt. She had suspected something was wrong with her brother, but had not taken action. Taylor, Thomas's mother, returned from abroad, her face etched with sadness as she attempted to make sense of her son's behavior. The police inquiry found details about Thomas's life since he left Los Angeles. He'd wandered across cities, slipping into hazardous circles, his once bright spirit destroyed by resentment. A journal discovered at his apartment showed his obsession with the Forresters, namely Brooke. He blamed her for every rejection and setback, perceiving her as the source of his anguish. The postings became darker and more insane, culminating in a horrifying plan to make them all suffer. Brooke's fate remained unknown. There was no corpse located and no ransom asked. The police suspected that she may still be alive and being held by Thomas, but their hopes were dwindling. Ridge clutched to it, reluctant to believe she had left. He spent nights reading over maps and recreating Thomas's moves, hoping for a clue. Meanwhile, Steffi worked with professional investigators to discover her brother, not only to save Brooke, but also to save Thomas from himself. Brooke awoke in the dead of night in a remote cottage far from Los Angeles. Her head throbbed, and her hands were bound with a scratchy rope. The air was wet, and the only sound was the trickle of a leaking faucet. She attempted to scream, but her throat was raw, and her voice was just a squeak. Panic overwhelmed her, but she forced herself to remain calm. Brooke Logan was a survivor. She had seen worse, hadn't she? The door creaked open, and Thomas entered, a lantern casting shadows on his face. He glanced at her with a mixture of triumph and anguish. "You're awake," he replied, his tone strangely calm. "Good. We have a lot to talk about." "Thomas," she said raspily, her eyes begging. "You don't need to do this. Whatever you are feeling." Taylor never expected life to play such cruel games on her emotions. For years, she thought she had reached a fragile peace after so many clashes with Brooke, the woman who appeared destined to be her opponent in every aspect of life. Their lives had always been intertwined in ways neither of them desired, struggling for love, family, and dignity. But nothing could have prepared Taylor for the day she learned the truth about the son she had raised with all of her heart and loved as her own. Thomas had been her son, her pride, and her source of joy in bad times. Taylor felt fate had selected her for this job from the moment she had him in her arms. She recalled his first smile, the way his small fingers curled around hers, and the sleepless evenings she spent cradling him against her bosom, humming lullabies into his ear. She was positive that he was her blood, gift, and child. Nonetheless, fate revealed itself as brutal. The truth came as a tempest of murmurs and suspicions, culminating in an irreversible confession. A test, a nasty, scientific display of numbers and lines, revealed something Taylor had never considered. Thomas was not hers. His blood conveyed a different mother's narrative. Someone else was responsible for his birth. And that person was Brooke. Taylor's world appeared to crumble inward as he attempted to breathe. Brooke, of all people, the woman who had been her competitor for years, who had stolen her affection, and who had stood on the other side of every hope Taylor had held dear. Brooke had been raising her own child. Brooke's kid, whose skinned knees she bandaged, whose tears she soothed away, and whose future she carved out with her own shaky hands. Taylor's memory flashed back to the innumerable times Thomas had proudly shown her his school projects, the way he would look up into her eyes for reassurance, the way he muttered, "Mom," in times of dread. How could those recollections suddenly feel like borrowed time, ripped from a truth she never knew? She put herself into parenthood with an unconditional love. But today, that love has turned into agony. She watched Thomas sleep that night, once the truth was revealed. His face was calm, and his chest rose and fell in a pattern that once made her feel protected. But she couldn't help but see Brooke in the shadows of that moment, like if Brooke had always been there, invisible, waiting to reclaim what was rightfully hers. Taylor's heart was shattered with jealousy, sadness, and guilt. She loved Thomas more than life, but was she stealing another woman's destiny? Brooke did not approach Taylor with compassion. Their background had rendered tenderness impossible. Her speech had sharp edges, as if even the truth was a weapon designed to injure. Brooke's eyes, however, revealed a softer torment, perhaps even uncertainty. Her gaze reflected Taylor's sorrow rather than triumph. Brooke, too, had lost years that she could never regain. She had not kissed Thomas's forehead every night, cheered for his games, or soothed his nightmares. She had not been present. That absence was its own penalty, even while the facts crowned her as the true mother. Nonetheless, the understanding sank deeply into Taylor's psyche. She recalled every dispute she had ever had with Brooke, every angry word spoken, and how brutally ironic it was that the kid caught between them bore Brooke's blood while being held in Taylor's arms. Their competition, once based on men and choices, had morphed into something deeper and more tragic: motherhood. Days turned into terrible lengths of stillness and questions. Thomas began to detect the heaviness surrounding him, but neither woman dared to tell him too much just yet. He asked Taylor why she cried so much and why her hands trembled when she brushed his hair off his forehead. She'd grin through her tears and tell him it was nothing, but deep down she knew it was everything. Taylor composed letters at night, but never sent them. She poured out her love for Thomas, as well as her anxieties that he might change his mind about her once he knew the truth. She assured him that no matter what blood said, she had chosen him every day, and that her love was as genuine as the stars above them. To Brooke, she scribbled words of regret and contempt, twisted confessions that she could never express face to face. Sometimes she admitted to loathing Brooke for being so inextricably linked to her, for being the one person she could never escape. Other times, she acknowledged that she pitied her for losing those early years, for missing the first steps, the first words, and the first time Thomas said, "I love you." After the truth was revealed, Brooke and Taylor were joined together in unforeseen ways. Thomas's future decisions were inextricably linked to one another. Every decision became a battleground of silent tears and loud fights. Brooke wanted to retake her role as a mother. Taylor clung fiercely to the position she'd been in for so long. In the midst of it all, Thomas, who was still too little to comprehend properly, could only sense the schism between the two women who should have been his defenders. Taylor and Brooke were sitting in solitude one evening. They had argued until their voices gave way. till tiredness prevented them from summoning any more rage. In the silence, Taylor revealed what had been hidden beneath her rage. "He calls me Mom. That is all I've ever been to him. But I know he's yours." Brooke's eyes welled up with tears as her normal armor slipped away. For the first time, they were two mothers, free of rivalry and broken by fate's harshness. Taylor learned that grief does not have a single direction. She mourned the loss of her status as Thomas's only mother. Brooke mourned the years that had been stolen from her, years that no one could bring back. And Thomas would one day mourn the simplicity of the love he believed he knew, destroyed by a truth he had never asked for. As the days turned into weeks, Taylor learned to understand something that both increased her pain and provided clarity. Truth did not decrease love. Her attachment with Thomas was based on memories that no DNA test could erase. He may have Brooke's blood, appearance, and pedigree, but Taylor's affection was imprinted on every aspect of his childhood. Nothing, not even awful disclosures from fate, could take that away. However, when she stood one morning watching Brooke hold Thomas's hand and him stare up at her with a fascination he had previously kept only for Taylor, her heart fractured anew. She had to share him now. She had to make room for Brooke, the woman who had once been an adversary but was now inexorably linked to her through the boy they both adored more than life. Taylor's story was no longer one of triumph or failure, nor of love gained or lost. It became a narrative of perseverance, learning to mother through pain, and loving a child enough to recognize that love sometimes requires sharing. Her melancholy persisted, a subtle aching that followed her everywhere, but she endured it because she loved Thomas too much to let him be ripped apart by the enmity between two women who had already suffered so much. In time, Thomas would discover the truth. He would eventually face questions that no one could answer. But for the time being, Taylor opted to cherish the laughing, the small hands in hers, and the memories that would always be hers regardless of bloodlines. She had found the cruelest reality, that she was raising her enemy's child, but she had also discovered the calm courage that came from refusing to allow that truth to poison her love. Her anguish became her shadow, as did her love. And, despite the fact that the world had written her role in indelible ink, Taylor persisted each day to wake, love, mother, and endure, because Thomas was still her kid in every manner that mattered, even if fate attempted to convince her differently.